This program is brought to you by the Reeves Law Firm, representing you and your Social Security and disability needs. If you have a problem or questions regarding Social Security and disability, call attorney Anthony Reeves, toll free at 1-888-962-0007. Again, that's 1-888-962-0007. Or go to www.reevesfirm.com.
Good day and welcome to another edition of Q&A Social Security Disability Today. I am your host, Attorney Anthony Reeves. Let's get to your questions. Okay, learning disability and applying for Social Security disability benefits. This situation typically comes up when someone comes to me and basically says, hey, as a result of my inability to learn, I believe that I'm disabled. All right, here's where this becomes a little tricky. Learning disability is a little bit easier to work with kids because in a kid's case, when you're going to be looking for IQ scores, you're going to look for test scores. If they're taking standardized tests, like in some states that offer standardized tests, you're going to look to see how they're doing on those. You're going to see what kind of classes they were in, special learning disabled, special education, things of that nature, seeing if the person is on an individualized education plan. In other words, if you're alleging learning disability as a child, there's usually a lot more things that you can put your hands on to demonstrate whether or not you necessarily are quote-unquote learning disabled. When people say they are learning disabled, under the regulations, typically what we're looking for, at least what I'm looking for, is do you meet the requirements of the listed medical impairments for what we call intellectually disabled? Okay, you have an intellectual learning impairment. So for my purposes, I'm going to be looking to see if your IQ scores are going to be below 70 and below. That's really what I'm looking for. Because saying that you have a difficult time learning in and of itself is not necessarily disabling. What you're trying to show with Social Security is that your learning condition is of such a level that it disables you. Now, I know that sounds kind of weird, but just kind of listen to what I'm saying. There are people who have low IQs who still are able to function in society. So just saying that you're having difficulty reading and writing does not necessarily get you over the threshold to getting disability benefits. Now that's for kids. Let's talk about adults for a second. Remember when in some of my previous videos, I indicated that the standard for kids is a lot higher? Well, it's tougher when you're talking about an adult. Now, when I say this, you're going to say, okay, why is that? Can't you use the same standard? I got school records that show I was in special classes. I got held back a few grades. I can't read and write. And you're right. Those things are going to be helpful to you. But let's move on to something more important. And I'm going to ask this question. Name some jobs that don't really require you to have to know how to read and write. And you would say there are none. Well, not necessarily. You could be a security guard. You got to dial a number. If you've got a walkie-talkie, all you have to do is push a button. You could be a system surveillance monitor, which basically means you're sitting at a terminal watching a screen. You may be able to make that argument. Maybe you're a greeter in Walmart. You don't necessarily have to read and write. What about manual labor work? Like if you're a helper where all you're having to do is sweep sites at construction sites, or maybe lifting up bags of rice or bags of potatoes, things of that nature. Manual labor like that. Those are the types of jobs that don't necessarily require you to have to read or write or have any type of substantial intellectual skills. Now, keep in mind this. If you're over the age of 50 and above, the problem with learning disability becomes much more prominent for you at that particular point, because when they're looking at the guidelines, is what we call the medical vocational guidelines, your educational level, whether it be marginal, limited, or high school, and if you're saying you're learning disabled, you're probably going to fall in the marginal range, your ability to adjust to other work becomes more crucial when you get older. So this is what I tell people. If you're younger than 18, if you're saying you're learning disabled, we're going to be doing a lot of looking at how you're functioning in school and what your school situation is, whether you're in special education classes, whether you've been held back, testing. That's going to give us a pool of reference there. If you're over the age of 50, if you have a marginal education, which means your learning problems have caused you to have some significant problems, meaning you have difficulties reading, writing, you didn't make it all the way to like 6th grade or 7th grade, something like that. That is going to help with us making a determination if you have skills collectively with your other situations, your age and your work background, to transfer to other things. Learning disability or applying for it when you're talking about between the age of 18 and 49 is going to be a little tougher, because keep in mind this: there may be some jobs that you may be able to do despite any learning difficulties that you may have. So I know this is probably a really long-winded statement, but just let me put it like this. When you say you are learning disabled, if you're going to look for a representative to represent you, or more importantly, you're looking to apply and represent yourself in your Social Security claim, be prepared to answer a litany of questions. And like what? Well, how many years were you held back? When they ask you were you held back, make sure you pay attention. Were you held back because of your academic performance, or were you held back for some other reason? Maybe you transferred from school to school. Maybe you stopped for a little while because you wanted to help work at the house. Maybe you left for a period because you were held back because maybe you were homeschooled and then you were a little bit behind. The key is, were you held back due to academic performance? Were you in any type of special classes? Were they emotionally handicapped? Were they learning disabled? Were you in big classes? Were working one-on-one? Did you have to take any standardized tests? If you did you pass those tests? Did you fail them? If you passed them, were your scores really low? Did you need special accommodations in order to get through those tests? When you were in school, do you know if you were put on any type of special education plan? It's what we call an individualized education plan to help you get through school. Now, you may not know that, so you might want to ask your parents that, because they would know that. Okay. Also, do you have problems reading, writing, and doing math? Now, here's what people tickle me when they bust out and they say, "Oh, I have problems reading, writing, doing math." Let's back it up a second. Reading. If you've got to fill out an application to go for a job, who reads it for you? Well, I can read some a little bit, and I catch people right there. I'm like, think about this logically. How did you get through that? You had to read something. Take it even a step forward. Do you have a driver's license? Well, yeah. Well, how did you take the exam? Because most states, there's a written exam before you take the driving exam. So that means you had to read an exam and you had to write responses. So how did you get through that? Even the Social Security disability process, you have to read forms and fill them out. So do you read them, or does somebody else read them for you? Let's go to the math part. You're talking about, I have problems doing math. Well, if you go to the store and you buy something, do you know how much change you're going to get back? Can you check to make sure you weren't taken advantage of in terms of getting the right amount of change? Can you add? Can you subtract? Can you multiply? Can you divide? And sometimes what happens is people say, well, I struggle with dividing and math, and adding, but I can do a little bit of subtracting. Keep in mind, when you're saying you're learning disabled, you're saying that you lack skills from an educational and intellectual standpoint based on your intellectual capabilities. So you want to be able to demonstrate those things. Then, if you're in the workforce, ask them, if you're alleging learning disabled, you want to ask the question, okay, have you worked? What kind of work did you do? And if you did any kind of work that didn't require you to do math or adding or subtracting or reading or writing, the magical question is going to be, well, why can't you do that work anymore? And this is for people who solely say their only condition is learning disability. This is why I tell people, be careful and be mindful of what you are asking for and what you're telling the government about when you are alleging that you believe a particular condition is disabling you. Because sometimes what happens is people think, if I say these magic words, I'm learning disabled, I'm a shoo-in. Well, no, that just opens the door for a lot more questions, and you need to be prepared to give those answers. Stay right here, and when we come back, we will tell you what show we're going to be hitting up. All right. On our next show, we're going to talk about what happens right after you walk out the door of that disability hearing. You've had the hearing before the judge, and you want to know what happens next. We're going to answer those questions for you. Again, this is Attorney Anthony Reeves, and this is your Q&A Social Security Disability Today.